Shall we get started?
Let's go.
All right. Today is Friday, November 2nd. This is the Kubernetes CSI implementation meeting. Let's head straight towards 112 status. So we have the snapshot E2E tests.
So that is updated. There is one thing that, so my coworker updated is assuming that the external snapshot also uses the leader election, but that PR is not merged yet in the external snapshot.
Okay.
And then you still need to talk to Jim and see whether we want it or not. So I don't know for the leader election if we need to wait on some changes. I thought it's going to be changed to use the list instead of endpoint. I don't know if there's anything we need to wait on.
Yeah, I guess is the leader election required at this point? Because we made it optional or off by default for all the other components.
So that's for the external provisioner, right? So snapshot does not have it yet. So there is a PR to add that. It's not merged, but then this E2E test assumes there is already leader election. So I asked him to remove it. So I think there's a decision we want to make whether we want to get this E2E test merged first without waiting for the leader election change in external snapshotter.
Yeah, I guess the main thing is do we, is it going to be a requirement that we run external snapshotter with leader election?
It's not going to be a requirement. It's going to be, it should be optional. Yeah, should not be required.
Then I think the test should be fine leaving it off.
Okay, because he added that. Because I asked him to remove it. So
configurable option. So then in the future, when you do have leader elections, you could add a new test that tests both.
Okay, just to add a config option then. Okay.
Yeah. And then for now, we can get this test checked in.
Okay, sure. Michelle or Saad, can you also review this?
Yeah, can you go ahead and assign me on it?
Okay. I don't think I have the right to assign, but I will add your name there.
All right. Let's see. Chang is not here, so we'll need to get an update from him later. Jan, do you have an update on the workload tests?
Yeah, the CSI mock is fixed and the PR is ready for review.
All right, awesome. Review. And this is no longer, okay.
Well, there was a link to the PR.
Oh, whoops. Blocked by, okay, I can remove this one. I can't do Word, oh my God.
I think that last line, CSI test still broken.
Okay, this looks a little better.
Okay.
All right. Okay, let's go to this quarter's tasks for CSI GA. Let's see.
Before we do that, let's set the context. We are 2 weeks away from code freeze, a little less than 2 weeks. What I wanted to do today was get an assessment from everyone about how realistic we think it is that we're going to be able to make it. And then at the end of this call, the result should be one of three things. Either we say we can definitely make it, or we may or may not make it, but we should communicate it out to SIG storage and let them know that it's possible that we might not make it and what the plans for that are if we don't. Or three, we say absolutely not, it's not possible, and we need to decide what to do there. So when you give your status update today, especially for your tasks tied to CSI GA, please keep that in mind and try to give an update in terms of how realistic do you think it is that we're going to be able to land this within the time that we have remaining for code freeze. So that's also important to note is that the immediate deadline, November 16th, is code freeze, so everything needs to be merged that goes into Kubernetes by November 15th. And for the sidecar containers, things like that, we have a little bit more time, a little bit more leeway. So with that, let's go ahead and get started.
All right. So first task is moving the API objects to V1. Were we able to get Jordan to review this?
Yeah, Fabio is here on the call, and he's basically doing the stuff. Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Nope. Well, he has issues with his microphone.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear you.
Okay, so I submitted a pull request, but David is doing some changes in the V1 Alpha 1 version of the objects. So I will just wait for his PR to get merged, and then I will rebase mine.
Oh, so you're talking about the moving the CSI node info from alpha to beta?
Yes.
Okay. This one is specifically moving all
sorry.
users to GA.
I don't remember any comments from Jordan on this one.
Okay. I will go and try to ping Jordan today and see if he has any more concerns. And I guess we'll still need Fabio to take over this.
Yeah.
All right. Next up is the Cubelet device registration.
Yeah, I had a PR out for the registration, and I asked Jan to take a look, and he approved it and got merged. I was so used to, I thought I was gonna get. Oh wait.
Oh, this for the CSI Cubelet deregistration. This is the one you're talking about?
Deregistration, yeah.
All right, cool.
But after I asked for the review, I realized, well, we probably should also remove the CSI driver object if we're going to do deregistration, because that code was not doing that. So I wanted to kind of run that by Jan and Saad to make sure, and Michelle to make sure that's the proper course, because this code is not. This code is only cleaning up the internal CSI driver objects and cleaning up the node info stuff. So after that, I went back and added code to actually explicitly remove the CSI driver object as well.
Okay. So I think that makes sense. We should remove the driver registration from the CSI node info object. Just make sure you might not need to remove the whole entire object because we register multiple drivers with the same object.
For CSI driver?
Actually, CSI driver should.
Oh, sorry, CSI node info.
Yeah. So let's talk.
Yeah,
about
CSI node info, the logic. Say it again.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, Michelle, you're right. CSI node info does have that logic that you just mentioned. So it does count its reference to the different drivers, and then only when there's none left, it deletes it. So that's already there, and that's in head.
You should make sure.
So what I'm talking about is specific CSI driver.
And also make sure like there's no race conditions where like another driver is also registering at the same time.
I think an API update is protected with.
Is it delete?
Version.
Like if you delete the whole object, is that protected?
I think so.
Well, so it should be a one-to-one between the driver and the CSI driver object, because the name for the driver is its key. So if the system receives,
do you also do the counting to make sure that only the last instance removes the CSI driver? Because if I have,
the last,
like there's only one CSI driver object for the entire cluster, right?
Right.
And if I deploy 4 node instances of my driver, right?
Shouldn't they?
And if I uninstall one of those instances, the CSI driver cluster object should not be removed.
So right now, if I remember correctly, the driver registrar inside the controller gets set into the mode to create the CSI driver object, right?
That makes sense.
Can we use that? Let that one driver registrar do the deletion.
That makes sense. I think that would be good. The only thing is we need to think about what triggers that.
I think we have a driver registrar on the cluster scope that installs the CRD. I'm not sure how to uninstall it, but I would definitely not do any reference counting because that's racy.
Yeah. So let's avoid touching CSI driver in this deregistration call, Vlad.
So leave that out?
Leave that out. We'll leave that as part of the external cluster driver registrar. That external cluster driver registrar is what creates the CSI driver object and is somehow responsible for deleting it. We don't know how yet, but potentially it's
okay. I can buy that.
Deleting. This object, or sorry, this deregistration should clean up the CSI node info. And Chang, can you help review that code that Vlad put out?
Yep, definitely.
Cool.
Yeah, it's already merged.
Okay, so just send up the
yeah, it's already merged, but Jan had taken a look at it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So currently, what is merged already does the CSI node info cleanup, but does not touch CSI driver, correct?
That's correct.
And I think that should be okay. Is there anything else you think that needs to be changed here?
No, the only thing that came to mind was somehow cleaning up the CSI driver, but if we're saying that that should be external, then I think we're done.
Okay, so I think we should be good here. Chang, if you get a chance, just take a look at it to sanity check it, but I think we should be good here then.
Okay.
Yep.
Also, I know David is working on changing the some of the fields inside the CSI node info object, and we were thinking of including those changes in beta as well, right?
Okay, so you can add on top of this PR because it's already merged.
Right. Do we want to track that as a separate item here?
Yeah, we probably should.
It's affecting GA too,
yeah.
Right? I can add an item there.
Here, I'm putting it under this move CSI driver and CSI node info objects from alpha.
Cool. Okay.
All right. So Vlad, going back up, there's also just the general Cubelet device registration feature.
Yes. So I also have another PR that's indicated here. I've already asked Renaud to take a look at it, and basically it includes different small changes, but changes that are needed to indicate that this is going to GA. So Renaud had already taken a first pass at it. He is, like I said earlier, his time is a little bit short on this. So I'm trying super hard to get this in, and hopefully next week be able to present to Node, to the SIG node. But he won't be able to attend, so it'll be probably just.
Would it be helpful, since Renaud seems like he doesn't have a lot of time, to find out who actually reviewed Renaud's changes from the Node team and have them review this PR?
Yes, that would be something that would be definitely helpful, because that's probably is going to be somebody who gives us yeah or nay on this. I know there was another name, Vikas, but he has not been active. I haven't seen him.
Was he an approver? Or, yeah.
I don't remember.
Okay, so let's do this.
I
Let's
think
go back to. All right, I mean, just take a look at this PR and figure out who the approvers are. And you can, if there are Googlers, ping me or Michelle, and we can help, get those people on this PR.
Okay.
And yeah, so let's get folks on it. Even before you go talk to Signode, let's just get folks looking at it. Is there anything else beyond this PR that you think might be needed?
It's unclear right now. I mean, when I talked to Renaud, he was talking about. I gave him a list of currently available drivers that are basically using this feature as something that he needed. But I don't think both him and I, we're not exactly clear what else would be needed other than these changes, which basically updates the packages from V1 beta to just V1.
Okay.
And comments and feature gates updates. That's pretty much what's in that PR.
Okay.
So I'm not entirely sure what else is needed.
So I guess we just need to get the approvers on there, and if they have concerns, we'll go from there.
Yes, I agree.
All right, awesome.
Cool, thank you.
Moving to the CRD installation mechanism.
CRD installation mechanism is green and should be ready to, it's just waiting for review. I pinged the approvers on this. So they need to take a look at it. I'm going to ping them again. I think it's Chow and Daniel Smith and Mike Denise. I'll poke them again today to take a look at this.
All the tests are passing and stuff.
It should be good. Tests are passing. One problem with this is that currently the mechanism is in place, but it doesn't necessarily automatically deploy unless you set the correct environment variable. And I'm making sure that I do that for the alpha clusters, or for the alpha clusters, because this CRDs were alpha so far. Once the graduation to beta change goes in, we need to also make sure that the correct environment variables are set for beta, and that this is happening automatically for beta. So we need to do that.
Okay, so there's a sort of new dependency here.
Yeah, and we might be able to just do this as part of the PR that's moving those objects to beta. I'll add a comment on that one about where that code should go and sync up with Flavia.
All right. Next is the topology support.
Yeah, so regarding the external admission webhook, I spoke to, in SIG cluster lifecycle as well as in API machinery. So I spoke to Jordan and Tim so far, Tim St. Clair, I believe. And both of them were like, this whole idea of putting in an external admission webhook in entry was not something that has precedence. And they basically were like, we don't really know where this should go in. So I proposed, like, how about the staging area where the CSI API is? And that was also discouraged because of the fact that that's mainly for APIs. So the net of it is the other point that, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Did you suggest add-on manager?
Yes, I did.
And they didn't like that either?
Yeah. The one interesting point that Jordan brought up is like how exactly the build and the image for this will work. In that, if it's entry, and let's say we have a deployment that gets set up to deploy the admission webhook binary, then where exactly would that image be built, pushed to, and then pulled in as part of the whole deployment cycle, right? So it's the idea I get so far is that this just doesn't have any precedence, and therefore it's probably a new path. And one workaround just to get like some kind of processing in might be I was thinking like, can we just add that logic in the entry node info manager where the CSI node info objects are generated? Because this is just validation. If we add the validation there, it might just solve at least what we are getting towards, and then explore if we can make it better in a future release. Like,
So the
modular.
suggestion is the node info object that we already have, which is
Right.
not, it's a CRD.
So right, I think the suggestion is currently we don't expect users to create the CSI node info object. It's all managed by Cubelet. So technically, if we can make sure, if we put validation in Cubelet to make sure, Cubelet is doing the right thing, then that can at least give us a temporary solution until we can figure out this whole external emission webhook story.
But we
Is
don't
that
even. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask Deep, is that what he's proposing?
Yeah, that was sort of my thought around this, because I don't think we have enough runway to get to figure out like exactly how the whole external mechanism might work out.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say like if Cubelet is the only component creating CSI node info, we don't even need explicit validation logic there. Like as long as we can guarantee that Cubelet is doing the right thing, it's preserving the set and map guaranteed.
Yeah, but we can't depend on that behavior. It's still good to have validation. But I agree. I think the fact that it is only Cubelet doing it and we can add validation logic there should be enough to get us to unblock us for beta at least.
What does it mean to add validation in Cubelet?
So like we have to, Cubelet takes the topology information that the driver reports and uses that to construct it. So Cubelet still has to validate that whatever the driver gave is legit.
Basically, apply the set and map semantics, as Cheng just said, around the.
Okay, yeah, like in the conversion in between driver data to CSI node info data, we basically instead of like validating, we're essentially making sure that the final output of that conversion is correct.
Yep.
Right. So specifically in the node info manager, when it's doing the update CSI node info, it has the node info object and do the validation there.
Right. Yeah.
That's a good path forward.
Okay, I think that seems like a reasonable workaround. Is this the last blocker for topology to beta for CSI?
No, the other thing is the E2E tests.
Okay.
Cheng, do you have an update on that?
Yeah, I was able to write the main positive and negative test cases. I want to do some refactoring on the on combining the test dynamic provisioning function and the test delayed binding provisioning functions, and I needed to do it because I'm injecting some node selector logic in there, and combining the two will make it a lot easier.
Okay. Do you have a rough ETA for when you think you're going to be done with that?
I'm hoping by like mid next week.
Okay. So overall, between Cheng and Deep, how do you feel about landing this feature by the 15th?
So I should have the entry patch hopefully by Monday tops. So I can send it in for review, and then the tests and this can go in parallel because they're not dependent on each other. So hopefully by midweek, next week we should have a good idea of where we stand.
Okay,
Yeah, an E2E test can definitely make it.
cool.
Cool.
So that seems
right.
fairly good.
Okay. Let's see. And then for the rest of the items for moving from alpha to beta, let's see. So David's changes might make,
Slow this down.
yeah, slow this down a little bit. And then the other blocking item is that we need the E2E test for pod workload.
So maybe we can ask Fabio.
Yeah, I think, let's see, Jan, you gave an update earlier there.
Yeah, the end-to-end for workload is ready for review. There is nothing blocking that.
Okay, cool. So at least this should be looking good, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the only blocker here now is David's changes and then the CRD installation. Fine. Okay, so that looks fairly healthy.
Yeah. I guess migration is still alpha, right?
Yes.
So technically, we don't need to put David's changes into the beta objects unless his changes are like significantly changing something.
You mean just put it in alpha?
Yeah, just leave it in alpha for now and
move
it with when migration goes to beta.
Yeah, I think he's only adding fields anyway, and most of the changes are in the logic.
I think he was going to add a status field, and that's a pretty major change.
Oh yeah, because we have to add a whole spec thing too.
Yeah.
Should definitely do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. CSI spec to 1.0.
So I've had a number of meetings this week. One was with Tim Hawkins internally to get his approval. He went over the whole spec to see if he had issues. He had a number of small nits that he wanted us to fix. I opened up CSI spec issues for that. I have a handful more from his review that I need to open. In the meantime, I'm also working with the CSI approvers to triage every issue that we have opened in this container storage interface for whether we need to close it, deal with it post 1.0, or if it's required for 1.0. And for 1.0, we also prioritize them P0, P1, P2. So far, we've identified 4 P0 issues that we want to close. At least one of them already has a PR out. The other 3 look reasonable to land within the next week. Beyond that, I suspect as we continue, we could end up with maybe, let's say, 4 more P0s. I think it depends on how many people we have helping with that. So it's possible that we can get it done within the next week. If we don't get it done within the next week, we're in trouble. Ideally, what I want to do is Monday after this coming week, declare the RC for CSI 1.0. That way, on the Kubernetes side, we can start a PR that is picking up those changes. And then as soon as it's cut, we can pick up the new version. We're going to grab a new room. Hang on.
You know, I'm not even sure that this meeting's going on. So if you want to sit here, let me just see.
Okay. So we'll figure that out.
Here as well.
Hello?
Hi, sorry, Saad and I had to relocate.
Okay, so this is the biggest risk right now. It seems like we should be able to make it within 1 week if everybody on the CSI spec side works hard and is available for review. So far, they've been pretty engaged, and we're going to set those expectations. I have another meeting with them today. If that happens to slip, then we're at risk. But if we can land that within the next week and then cut the RC on the following Monday, then we can be in a good place for picking it up on the Kubernetes side. And then we should be okay for this item.
You want to cut the first RC next?
Full screen.
Do we expect any changes in the spec, like big changes?
Yes, there are breaking changes that will happen. So we will need to fix those on our side, both in the
Okay.
site and Kubernetes. So I would like to target Monday 12th for RC of CSI 1.0. That gives us 4 days to pick it up and hopefully get the official version in.
Do we also want to potentially consider asking for an extension from the release team?
I think as we get closer, we can consider that. For now, I think it might be fair.
Okay. Do you need help from like any of us to review these issues?
Well, does anybody have free bandwidth, first of all? If not, I think the folks that we have working on the spec right now should be good.
Okay. All right. And then let's see, regarding the block changes, we had a meeting, Vlad set up a meeting with a bunch of us, and we concluded that in-tree block can continue to beta, and we will keep CSI block in alpha until we can get better testing.
Okay. That I think was the original plan, so that works.
All right. Next is, oh, I guess Patrick's not here. I think he's making progress on these. I've been on the reviews.
Yeah.
So that
And
should
this
be
is
fine.
mostly external, so
Yeah.
that shouldn't be a blocker.
Okay, and we'll need to get an update later. Luis is not here.
Luis mentioned on Slack that he's going to start on this item next week.
Okay.
But also external, so not
Yeah.
November 15th blocker.
Sure. Do that. Okay. So that's it for the track tasks. Let's go back up to the top for any
So
issues.
this one I wanted to talk about, the read-only issue. I actually updated this last night based on talking to David and Michelle. I think I slightly misunderstood the current state. So if we can open up the second link there. The problem here was that Kubernetes in general has a bunch of different knobs for setting read-only, and they vary from driver to, or from in-tree plugin to in-tree plugin and how they behave. And it's a little bit confusing for end users. For CSI, what I wanted to do was try and understand what the different knobs currently do, how they get passed through to CSI, and if we want to change that. Initially I had one version of this, but last night I changed this. So number one is PV/PVC access mode. For the most part, that's not problematic. Number two, in the pod spec, when you define a volume that references a persistent volume claim, you have two fields. One is the PVC name, and the second is whether that PVC is read-only or not. That field currently is passed through to mount. So the CSI node publish volume request gets that field. The third one is within the PV object, there is a, inside the CSI persistent volume source, there's a read-only field. And that one today is used to control attach, so it's passed to the controller publish. The problem with this one is that even though it's used, there's really no way to set it. The PV object is created by the CSI provisioner, and the CSI provisioner doesn't set this field, so it's defaulted to false. And so the end user or they have no way to be able to control that the volume should be attached as read-only, because this field has no way to be set. And it's immutable, so after you create the PV, you can't change it. And then number 4 is on every single mount in the pod, there is a read-only field to control how that pod should be mounted, or how that volume should be mounted in that pod, and that field currently is not used at all. So this seems pretty broken to me. One suggestion I had initially was for number 3, inside the CSI persistent volume source, the read-only Boolean we have there, remove it before we go to GA, and instead of using that for attach, use number 2 for attach, and then use number 4 for mount. Now this is a fairly large change. The benefit is that you now have a variable that the end user can control to control how, if the volume is going to be attached read-only or not. The drawback is that if you use number 2 to control attach, then you end up in a state where if you have 2 pods using the same PVC and one decides to attach it as read-only and the other one read-write, and they both land on the same node, the first one is going to win. It's a race between the 2 pods. Ideally, this should be a option on the PVC. That's one option. The other option is that we can leave it like this, and then the only change would be on number 4. So instead of only controlling mount with number 2, we could make it an OR with number 4. So if either number 2 or number 4 is read-only, then we mount it as read-only into the pod, and we leave the attach as number 3, with the caveat that if you actually want to attach a volume as read-only, you need to somehow be able to modify the PV object, which currently I think it's immutable. So I don't think you can change the spec. So I don't know how you would control that. Maybe a flag on the storage class.
Can the external provisioner set the read-only flag if the returned access mode is read-only many?
That is an option. The problem is that you can have multiple access modes requested. So someone can request read-only many and read-write once, and you'll get a volume, and we don't know necessarily what the user's intention is.
That would be the same issue as Intree, right?
I think Intree might be doing something weird with using a different field for attach. They might be using number 2 for attach, I forget. But yeah, I'm okay with that because that does reduce the number of changes we need to make. Does anybody else have any thoughts on this? Jan, maybe?
Not really. That could work. I have other issues with access mode, but that's probably for separate discussion. They don't map really well between Kubernetes and CSI.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah. Go for it, Vlad.
The read-only field that's on the volume .spec, where's that coming from?
Which
is
number?
that coming from the? No, there's so in volume.spec,
Uh-huh.
There's a
yes.
read-only field.
Yeah, that one is
And I was just
coming
wondering.
from number 2.
Okay.
So it gets pulled
I
out
thought
from.
maybe it intelligently selected which one.
Nah, it's pretty dumb.
All right.
It sounds like nobody has a strong opinion on this, and considering that we already have what's proposed or what's listed at the top as the current behavior, and we have 1 week, basically 2 weeks left to make changes, I'm going to try to minimize the changes. Instead of doing what I proposed there at the bottom, what I'll propose instead is that we keep it as similar to what it is as possible, and then do what Michelle suggested with number 3. Basically, if somebody specifies read-only as one of the options, one of the access modes, we'll go ahead and set it as read-only when we provision the volume. And secondly, allow a parameter, a custom parameter on the CSI provisioner that lets you control the read-only field. So when the volume is created and that field is specified, it automatically controls whether it's set to true or false. The caveat is that you cannot change it after you provision the volume, unless you're a cluster administrator and you, I don't know, delete and recreate the object. But I don't see a better workaround for it.
I have another question. Thinking down the line, possibly next quarter, if we ever get to inline.
Yes.
Which
so inline will actually
for inline it would be number 4.
Inline is going to be it'll be number 3. In the CSI volume source that you create, you're going to have a read-only field, and that's going to control attach. And then number 4 is going to control mount. So the equivalent of number 3 on inline controls attach, read-only, and the equivalent or number 4 controls should control the mount. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just thinking, when you're doing inline, will you have access to PV? Or would you just get a volume source?
So you're not going to have access to the PV, but you're going to have a CSI volume source, a new inline CSI volume source. And that new CSI, the inline CSI volume source is going to have a new field read-only underneath it. And you're just going to be able to use that directly from the pod.
Okay.
Oh, actually, no, that's a good point, because the external attacher does not have access to the read-only field, or doesn't have access to the pod. So you would need to add a read-only field to the volume attachment object.
Ooh, okay.
If you add a field to the volume attachment object, then the attach detach controller can set it. And for inline volumes, actually for both inline and for okay, let me think more about this offline. I want to come up with something that's reasonable and will work for everything, but not require a ton of work.
All right, and also semi-related, we've been trying to add more test cases against CSI drivers. And there's a PR out that will add about 30 or so test cases. And we found out that the read-only test cases are failing. One of them might be because of number 4. I think the test is actually setting this, and the test is failing because it's still writable. There's a second test that is failing, which is more concerning to me. Basically, the read-only is getting passed in through the driver, and the driver is bind mounting it as read-only, but the mount on the host is still writable, which means that the mount propagation is not actually propagating the read-only setting on the mount in the container. And we're trying to figure out if there's a way we can work around that. I'm thinking that we might have to do an extra remount step in the CSI plugin in order, so like once the CSI plugin returns from node publish, then Kubernetes might have to do an extra remount on that bind mounted path in order to be able to set things like read only.
Has anybody seen that issue?
I don't think anybody has tested in read only until now.
Okay, so if anybody has suggestions on that, let us know. Otherwise, we'll continue to debug that.
But we are expecting, or in the CSI spec, do we require that they do a bind mount of the target path?
Explicitly said, it just says make the volume available at.
Because if we have to add logic in Kubernetes to like do an extra bind mount afterwards, that means we would expect the plugin also gives us that path as a mount and not like a symlink or something.
Yeah, no, I think that should be fine.
Okay. All right, and my browser is frozen. Oh, here we go. All right, so those are the read-only issues. Two other things that I think, well, at least one other thing I think we need to make in before GA is to fix the volume operation metrics for CSI. Right now, all the metrics for all CSI plugins are clumped together into the same metric. So we need to be able to group those out per CSI plugin. And I think Hamant is going to be working on that. Let's see. And there's another bug related to volume attached limits with I think related to the CSI node info updating. Hamant has a PR out. I think Cheng is reviewing this.
Yep.
All right. Next is detaching from deleted node.
That has been merged.
Oh, it's been merged. Cool. Not an issue anymore. And let's see, Luis is not here. I think all of this is sort of encompassed in the CSI spec 1.0 stuff, right? Yeah. The block issues. And okay, block. And I guess there's a bunch of cleanup PRs. Vlad, do you think it's best that we postpone this to next release?
Yeah, I think so, because some of them are, it's a lot of them. But there's some good stuff that we definitely should come back and look at.
All right, awesome. So I think that's everything.
So let's decide if we want to publicize that CSI GA is at risk or not. In general, it's good to give folks a heads up if we're not going to be able to land. It seems to me the biggest risk is CSI 1.0. I think I'm going to prepare something. I'll send it to SIG storage. And it's not a, like, we're not going to make it, but it's a, hey, there's a possibility we might not make it depending on how CSI 1.0 goes and if we're able to get the right bits in the right time. And I wanted to give you guys a heads up for that. Any thoughts on that? And then let's aim to, so we have 2 weeks. We have until the 15th end of day to get things merged. But if we can target getting as much done within the next week as possible, keep in mind that code reviews can take a significant amount of time. Then at least we'll be in a good position for everything else. And we can dive on 1.0 issues if anything new crops up. But overall, I think we can still make it. And I'd like to make it. So let's see. Thank you for all your hard work.
So Saad, the spec improvements for 1.0, like that can go on in parallel beyond November 15th a little bit too, right? Yes.
So we need an official cut of 1.0 that needs to be picked up by Kubernetes by November 15th.
Okay.
Because I mean, technically, as long as we have an RC, it should be fine. But
Okay.
at least we need something that we're going to say this is 1.0.
And also because if there's, depending on what kind of changes we might make to the spec, we might need to change Kubernetes code to
Right.
work with those changes.
Makes sense.
Saad, how breaking are those changes? Because you mentioned some of them are breaking changes. Do you know?
I'd have to go back and look at it. I think
Okay.
they're not huge breaking changes, like changing the flow of how things operate. They're mostly like renaming things and possibly adding or removing a field here or there.
Okay.
Like it's significant enough that like
We need to do work on
Yeah.
our side to pick it up, but it shouldn't be like major criteria on our end.
all right. If no one else has anything else, I guess we can end here.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. We'll see you on Monday.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.